I always tell students that a good thesis project is something that will plague you for the rest of your life. Like it will keep you up at night forever and ever.
Hi. Hello.
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 Hello, and welcome to Architecting.
Hi, welcome to Architecting. I'm Rebecca Wagner here with the host, Adam Wagner. Hey, Adam, who's on the podcast today?
Happy New Year's. It's a new year. This is the first podcast of the new year, and I think we have a great guest on. So this person grew up in Ohio, kind of fell into architecture, went to the University of Cincinnati, and didn't want to end up in academia, but then went to Rice for grad school and soon after started teaching and hasn't looked back. He's taught in Ohio and Minnesota and then took over as the architecture department chair at CU Denver in 2019.
Marc Swackhamer.
Marc Swackhamer. Now, this is somebody I really like and I'm able to work with a lot when I teach at the school. I think he's brought a great amount of energy and rigor into the school. And, I don't know if it was sucking up or just being friendly, but I really stalked him before he came, and I was excited that he came to the school. And I actually stalked him on Facebook and sent him a message and had him join one of my class reviews like the day he landed in Denver. But he's just a great leader and an architect. We get into talking about some of his theories of architecture and diving into some of his projects. But, we didn't even get into some projects like his zippered wood project, which won an R&D award and was on the cover of Architect magazine in 2020. So check that out as well. But yeah, this is I'd say it's a deep dive into architecture and academia and projects, but an enjoyable conversation for me.
Nice. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, cool. Enjoy.
Many of our listeners are familiar with HouMinn Miller, a 100-plus-year-old company known for its rich legacy in modern designs, ergonomics, and thought leadership. For Colorado, Workplace Resource is the certified platinum dealership representing HouMinn Miller, and we are proud to support the Colorado design community. Whether you are in the market for a functional and stylish home office setup or exploring a broader solution to outfit your entire workplace, we are the partner you can trust. The local teams with HouMinn Miller and Workplace Resource can connect you with research and insights, create a high-performing work environment, especially in this current shift with the way we work. We encourage you to explore our Future of Work Hub for more information, and the link is in the bio. Conceptual thought starters. Not sure what type of solution works best? Browse our planning ideas to start the conversation. You can download Revit files and full tools to really help dial in your solution for your floor plan. And lastly, full project design, specification, and installation for small businesses to full campuses. Workplace Resource is really the place to begin. Be sure to connect with our team. We look forward to supporting our design partners in the Colorado community. And in the meantime, please enjoy Architecting.
Hey, we're happy to be sponsored by Modern in Denver magazine. For over a decade, they've been crafting fantastically curated content on Colorado designers and projects, spreading the gospel of good design within our region.
And I love how the goal of Modern in Denver aligns with the goal of this podcast, to better build up and connect the community of Colorado designers. So go buy a copy of the magazine at your local bookstand, subscribe to their weekly email list, and follow them on Instagram.
Check it out. Well, hey, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks for having me. This is really I'm honored to be a part of it.
You were always going to be one of the guests, and I just I needed to split up enough of the university people, so it's just not all university, because I could easily do that.
Exactly.
But,
yeah. I understand. No, it's great that you have a mix of practicing architects and in academics and people who span across both.
Keeps it interesting for me.
Yeah, for sure.
What'd your day look like today? What's a day of Marc Swackhamer look like?
It's been a busy week. Yeah, it's been a busy week. I've been getting ready to, which I can talk about a little bit, but I'm getting ready to pitch some of my research from the lab to the provost at the university. If the provost likes your research, then it feels a little bit like American Idol or something. But if the provost likes your research, give you a rose. Then, there's funding. Yeah, exactly. Then there's like potential funding behind it. So I've been getting ready for that, and I'm teaching a class with Sarah Aziz, and so I've been working on that, and then next year is our accreditation year, so we're kind of doing a lot of stuff to get ready for that as well. I also sit on the AIA board, so we had a long half day board meeting today, so that took up a bunch of my time. I don't know. It's a busy week. It's all going by in a flash.
Yeah, and then I get to slam this in on you on a Thursday afternoon. Yeah,
it looked like it was going to be a pretty easy week back when I decided on this date, and then it just filled in.
It always stinks up. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I know. I listened into a Christopher Kelly talk that you gave one time, and you were just saying how much you didn't like to talk about yourself. And I was like, I'm going to get that guy on here and have him start talking about himself. So in that spirit, the first question, who are you?
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Marc Swackhamer, and I'm the chair of the architecture department here at CU Denver. It's the only accredited architecture program in the state. So we pull from not just Colorado, but also the surrounding region. And I'm also a practitioner. I have a research practice with a colleague of mine, Blair Satterfield, who teaches up at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And our practice is called HouMinn Practice, which is kind of, in a way, an obsolete name now, because it was a mashup of the two cities where we live when we formed the practice. So he was living in Houston and I was living in Minneapolis. So it's a mashup of those two cities, but with the double meaning of being human centered. So HouMinn is spelled HOUMINN. And then I also, related to my work in HouMinn Practice, I started a research lab when I arrived here called LoDo Lab. And I can talk about all that stuff as we talk this afternoon.
Yeah.
That's kind of who I am. I before I came here, I was at the University of Minnesota for 15 years. And I got my undergraduate degree from University of Cincinnati and my graduate degree from Rice University down in Houston.
So where did you grow up? Where did you come from?
I grew up in Huron, Ohio, right on Lake Erie, about an hour west of Cleveland. It's a little tiny town, lake town. It was a cool place to grow up, but it was a pretty sheltered place. But I enjoyed it. My parents still live there, and I go back and visit. So when I went to college, when I went to Cincinnati, that was the first time I really, spent any significant time in a big, diverse, dirty, dynamic city. And it was a big learning curve for me in a way that it wasn't for some of my classmates. So it was interesting to go from little tiny town to Cincinnati.
Did you go there for architecture? Did you know that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah. I went to Cincinnati to go to architecture school, and I got a B.Arch, which is a terminal degree in architecture. You can get licensed with a B.Arch, but I felt like I still had more I wanted to learn, and I wanted to get a different perspective from the perspective that I had gleaned from Cincinnati. Cincinnati was it's a cooperative education school. So you alternate going from school to work, and you have like 4 different job experiences while you're in school as you go through. It's a requirement of the program. So to graduate from Cincinnati, you have to go through the co-op program. And it's kind of known nationally. It's one of the oldest co-op programs in the country. So by the time I graduated, I had worked at 4 different firms, and I had worked on construction drawings and done field work. And it's a very kind of nuts and bolts. At the time, it was a very kind of nuts and bolts education that I got. I really knew how to draw. I really knew how to put buildings together. But I felt like I wanted more on the conceptual end of the discipline. I wanted more theory and a different way of looking at the world that I knew architecture also offered, which I got a little bit of at Cincinnati, definitely. But Rice at the time was a very dynamic program with a new dean and super conceptually, theoretically driven. Really fun time to go there, and so I was really, it really expanded my perspective and how I think about architecture.
Yeah. And what about that choice? So you kind of came from a smaller place in Ohio. How did you know architecture was a thing, or that's what you wanted to do? And then, within Ohio and around Ohio, there's a lot of great schools. And how did you decide on Cincinnati?
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, for me, I kind of, in my parents, I mean, we all thought the same way. We thought of, I had kind of 2 areas where I excelled in school. One was math and one was art. And my parents naively thought, well, a discipline that is at the intersection of art and math is architecture. And I guess it's not that naive. I mean, it kind of is true. You can think about architecture from both a quantitative and a qualitative way, from both a left brain and a right brain perspective. Of course, once I got into architecture school, it was completely different than what I thought it was going to be. I mean, as I think it is with all of us who go through architecture school, it just kind of blew my expectations. But that was why I initially wanted to go into architecture school, is I thought it combined these 2 things pretty nicely. And it did to an extent. I got to, really, I focused more on the art side of things when I went to architecture school. The drawing and the modeling and the making were all the things that really attracted me to it and got me energized about architecture. Cincinnati, I think the co-op program is what really excited me. It really prepared you. I never intended to be an academic. I never intended to go take my career into the university. I always thought I would be a practicing architect. And so, if you want to be a practicing architect, there's few programs that prepare you to be a practicing architect, I think, as well as Cincinnati does. Interestingly, Rice in their undergrad program actually has a preceptorship program too, where you go and you work. So that's what attracted me to Cincinnati, was that I would get so much job experience while I was going through school.
And then you really kind of identified that sort of hole within your undergrad education and wanted to go, hone those skills more. Did you go directly from undergrad to grad? And then why Rice? Like what was that decision like?
Yeah, looking back on it, I don't really know why I decided that. It was more of a gut decision. I was like, I think I need to go to grad school. And even like a bunch of my buddies, a bunch of my friends who I'm still good friends with now, are like, why are you going to grad school? And I was like, well, I don't really know.
I need some more student
I just want to go to grad school. Yeah, exactly. Even then, at that point, when I was going to grad school, I was like, it was nowhere on my radar that I would be a teacher or an academic. I just wanted to get a different perspective, and I just had it in my brain and in my gut that I wanted more education and I wanted a different set of perspectives. So, yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why I did it, even like to this day. But I'm glad I did. I mean, Rice was amazing. I had some of my most formidable teachers at Rice, and it really opened my perspective about what is architecture, what architecture can be. I mean, when I was there were people there like Sanford Quinter and Bruce Mao and Michael Bell and Lars Larup and Mark Womble and Lindy Roy, and just all the Richard Ingersoll, all these like legendary people who it was just a amazing confluence of people who were there. Oh, Young Ho Chang, who is like now, I mean, just an amazing person. So all these amazing teachers were there at that time, and really opened my mind about, architecture can be a book, or architecture can be a story, or, architecture can be an object. Architecture doesn't have to be what we conventionally normally think of architecture as being. And it also, one of your questions that you sent me ahead of time was about, what was one of the most kind of challenging, I think one of the most challenging things you've experienced. It made me think about when I first got to school at Rice. I kind of thought I was, a hot pencil and had the world figured out and thought I could do everything. And I was a great designer, and, I was, it was my gift to Rice University that I would go there or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know that's
but, I was quickly disabused of that notion that I had the world figured out. And it was because of I can't remember her name, but this incredible studio teacher kind of took me aside, and I was designing these very competent buildings for her studio, and I even remember making these really beautiful models, and I think they were competent and interesting, and but she took me aside and she was like, you can do this in your sleep. Why are you in grad school? And it's not, I know why you should be in grad school, but I want you to think about it for yourself. Like, what do you want out of this? Because you're just doing this thing that you know how to do already. And if you're going to keep doing that, you should just go be an architect. But if there's something more that you want out of school, if there are bigger questions that you want to ask, and if you want to push yourself outside of your comfort zone and take risk and be uncomfortable, then you're in the right place. But if you're just going to keep doing these things that you're doing, I'll give you an A and that's fine, but it's a waste of your time and it's a waste of my time. You're not asking any bigger questions. And that was a really challenging conversation for me, but it was something that I still remember to this day. Her kind of taking the time and having the generosity to take me aside and provoke me with that question. Just kind of, why are you here? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's something I try to take forward and bring to my own students. You can problem solve, and you can meet the requirements of a studio brief and check all the boxes that are necessary to make a competent building. But really impactful work comes out of asking questions and not solving problems, but problematizing. And I talk to my students about that all the time. So that came from that conversation, and it sticks with me today. So I guess that's all circling back to Rice, and that's why I'm so glad I went to Rice, because there were teachers at Cincinnati who definitely encouraged me to think that way, but it didn't stick with me until I went to grad school. I didn't understand it. It didn't land on me until I matured a little bit.
So then what did you do with that challenge? How did that manifest itself in the rest of Rice and going beyond Rice?
Yeah. I mean, I think it came out in my thesis project at Rice. And, to this day, we don't have a thesis at CU Denver. In our grad program, we have a kind of a capstone project, but we don't have a thesis. But at Minnesota, we had a thesis, and at Cincinnati, where I first taught, we had a thesis. And I always tell students that a good thesis project is something that will plague you for the rest of your life. It will keep you up at night forever and ever. And it will be a question. It will be an open-ended question that you'll always ask in everything you do. And for me, that that happened with my thesis at Rice. I didn't design a building. I didn't really do architecture in the traditional sense in my thesis. I really used my thesis as an opportunity to ask questions about a material, and the material in that case was plastic. And I was really interested in the behavioral tendencies of the material and how the material can push back on your hand as push back on the willful hand of the designer and inform the work as much as you as the designer. And that's a question that Blair and I still ask to this day in our own work is, how can a material be an equal contributor and an author in the work as much as you as the designer? What is it telling you? How is it pushing back, and how is it unfolding and unfurling the work in a way that if you were just willfully creating form and pushing space around, you wouldn't do if that material wasn't present. So that was kind of the thrust of my thesis at Rice. And again, it's a question that isn't answerable, but it's one that I keep exploring with every project I work on to date.
Yeah, so that's pretty different from putting together a competent building.
And I got really interested in like industrial design through that thesis, and I got really interested in material science. I got interested in the scientific process, which is about setting up a set of questions without necessarily knowing the answer and seeing how those questions unfold.
So then what did that do to your career trajectory of going from wanting to be a practical architect, and then you graduate with this plastic thesis, and what happens?
Yeah, you're asking good questions. Thanks. What I did, well, it first of all, it made me interested in the kinds of practices that ask questions. So right away, it informed the kind of architect I wanted to be and the kind of architects I wanted to work for. I was much more interested in discursive practices than I was in maybe more commercial practices. And that's not a judgment at all on commercial practice. This is maybe just a different category of practice. And so I got really interested in practices that were more discursive. So I worked with a really small firm called Oliver Ray, which isn't around anymore. Doug Oliver and Jim Ray were the two partners of the firm, and they had won a PA award, and they had won an On the Boards award in Architect Magazine or something like that. And they were in Houston doing really, really interesting, provocative residential work. And so I started out with them, and Doug still to this day teaches, and he taught at A&M for a while. He went to school both Doug and Jim went to the GSD and came back to Houston to practice. And Doug taught at A&M for a while. Now he teaches at Rice. And I'm still in touch with those guys, but that's where I met Blair. Blair and I both worked at Oliver Ray, and it was a blast working there. I mean, it was the kind of firm where you just work, like 80 hours a week, and I don't advocate it, and I don't think it's a good thing, but it was submersive and intense, and a pretty formative experience for me early in my career. And then and I still think the world of those guys, and they really were incredible mentors and teachers for me. And then I went to work for my former teacher, Mark Womble, who I still am friends with also to this day. And Mark has a firm joined up with a more commercial firm called Bricker Kennedy in Houston, and Blair and I actually both went to Bricker Kennedy at kind of around the same time, and worked there. And again, we won some PA awards and some local AA awards, and did some really nice work there. While those firms both had commercial aspirations, I think they were first and foremost idea-driven firms that were about ideas, and the idea was really the important thing. That's the last place I really worked in a serious way in terms of being a practitioner before I went into academia.
Where'd you go, and what was that decision like?
So we just had my teacher and mentor and friend lecture last night at CU Denver, Daniel Friedman, and it was an amazing lecture. Super, super provocative. He was he's my most formative teacher at Cincinnati, and he just sent me an email, I think, out of the blue, just asking me if I would be interested in cutting my teeth with teaching, and if so, he had an open 1 year visiting position for me. And my wife and I just had our first child, our daughter Maeve, and we were living in Texas. We were both from Ohio, living in Texas, and we thought, well, this kind of kills two birds with one stone. It helps us move back to Ohio because the job was at University of Cincinnati, so it helps us move back to Ohio. And I'd been doing, sitting on reviews at Rice, and had just started to mull the idea that maybe I would do some part-time teaching at some point. Like maybe I would keep being a practitioner, but also teach a little bit, here and there. So I was like, wow, and I think the world of Daniel. And so I said, sure. And I sent him, my portfolio, and sent him, some thoughts on what I'd like to teach. And he hired me to teach in a 1 year visiting position. And my attitude was like, well, if I don't like it, I can always just go back to being a practitioner. I could try it for a year. It's a 1 year visiting position. And if I don't like it, I can slip back into the practice world. So that's how it started. And I loved it. I mean, I loved it right out of the gate. I always take the attitude that, you should migrate towards or follow the things that scare you the most. While teaching was really intriguing and interesting and alluring to me, it also just scared the shit out of me. I was so petrified the first day I stepped in the classroom. It really pushed me outside my comfort zone. It pushed me to think about things in new ways. It was an amazingly energizing and both scary and rewarding experience at the same time. And it just felt like the place that I should be.
How long were you there?
At Cincinnati, well, I was there for a year, and then I applied for a tenure track position at Cincinnati and then at a bunch of other schools at that point after the first year. Cincinnati had one open position for a tenure track job, and then I got offered a couple other tenure track positions, but I ended up staying at Cincinnati and stayed there for 2 more years. So I was at Cincinnati for a total of 3 years. And then again, because of Daniel was good friends with Renee Chang, who was the new head of the School of Architecture at University of Minnesota. They had a failed search. They interviewed a bunch of people, but weren't happy with any of the candidates. So Renee again called me out of the blue and asked me to apply for a tenure track position after 2 years at University of Minnesota. So on a whim, I just flew up there, did the interview thinking, it's good practice. I honed my portfolio, my resume and my dossier and polished it up and thought, well, this is a good experience for me to interview, and went up there and, man, nobody sells a position like Renee Chang. I mean, she is the ultimate closer. I've always thought that about her. Like, she's incredible at recruiting people to work for her. And she's an amazing person. And I was super excited by working for her. I was super excited by the Twin Cities, super excited about where the school was going. And it was a great move for me. I mean, at Cincinnati, all my colleagues were still former teachers of mine. And I just felt like I was never going to get out from underneath being the former student as a professor at Cincinnati. And so, she flew Connie up. I mean, another example of recruiting 101. She flew my spouse up and treated her really well and took us out to dinner, and Connie fell in love with the Twin Cities too. And we ended up taking the position there. And then that's where I was for 15 years before coming here.
So what was that school like? What, I mean, 15 years, a lot can change, but what was the kind of sense of it and the direction of it? And
well, Minnesota was kind of put on the map by Ralph Rapson. Ralph Rapson is a mid-century modernist architect who went through MIT. He worked for Saarinen, I believe he worked for Aero Saarinen. He was involved in Cranbrook. I don't exactly have the history entirely right, but there's this constellation of relationships that Ralph brought with MIT and the mid-century modernist, mafia, with Saarinen and Eames and the whole crew. And he was a really important voice there. In fact, before he even died, which is pretty rare, they named the building Rapson Hall. He was really the voice and the figurehead of that school for a long time. And so, for quite a while, Minnesota was one of the top, 5 or 10 programs in the country. And it really has this legacy that was driven by Ralph. And it also has this legacy of being a school that is taught primarily by practitioners. Even while Ralph was the head of the school, he was always practicing, and he has all kinds of buildings that were built in the Midwest and around the Twin Cities. Really, really an amazing architect. I had the privilege of meeting him before he passed away. He was still practicing the day he died. He died at age 96, and was still
a true architect. Yeah. So I got to have lunch with him several times. One time he had me bring a bunch of my sketchbooks, and he looked at my sketchbooks, and he loved my sketchbooks. His big criticism was I didn't have enough people in my sketchbooks, which was really a kind of a lovely observation. And because his work was always about people, it was always about the human experience. So I think Minnesota has this legacy of modernism and is a practice oriented school. It's a really great, solid program, and one that I was really proud to be a part of. It's both an undergrad and a grad program, and I think to this day the Twin Cities has one of the best architecture communities of any city that I know of. The average firm in the Twin Cities, I think, is
as good as a lot of the best firms in a lot of other cities. The work there is really strong, and the practice community is really quite talented. And I think that's a reflection of the solid education that students get at Minnesota. I mean, it's just a really, really solid, good school. And you can see that reflected in the work there. And I think the work in the Twin Cities is a combination of things. I think there's also a design culture in the Twin Cities that you don't see in a lot of other cities, a kind of arts culture that you don't see in a lot of other cities. There's a kind of tie to to Scandinavian heritage that you don't have in other cities. And so all this confluence of forces gives you the kind of really robust practice community that they have there. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or back and forth, because you have a good practice community, and that means you have good practitioners who are coming and teaching the students. They're producing good students that go into the practice community, and it's like a kind of a self-perpetuating machine that I think started with Ralph Rapson and Tom Fisher, the dean there, was a dean for 20 years in Minnesota, and was a former editor of PA Magazine, and really, through his vision and connections, really brought a strength and robustness to the school. And then Renee Chang was the head of the school there for 10 years and did an amazing job of cultivating the talent there.
Wow, yeah. It seems like sort of like our community in some ways of a bit of an island, right? Like it's not like the East Coast or Houston or something where there's a lot of schools around, but it's sort of its own center in some ways. You were teaching there, and then you became chair at some point, right? And what were you working on while you're there? Kind of directions of pushing the school or types of work?
Yeah, so I became the head of the school in 2014. So 2014 to 2019, I was the head of the school, and I was appointed the head of the school internally. So I was a associate professor at the time, and the dean held an open application process, and I applied to be the head of the school and got the position. I think the school always prided itself in its ability to produce really, really strong practicing architects, and in its students' ability to draw. And drawing was always a legacy of Ralph's, and to this day, I think the students from Minnesota can draw really beautifully. And I think I tried to advance and strengthen that legacy of the school. That it would be a practice-oriented school where the students really develop and cultivate their thinking through visualization, through the act of drawing, which I know you, Adam, can relate to, and I know the kinds of drawings you produce and the kind of drawing that you teach, and so it's something that I bring with me to this school, and something that I've always been interested in. I've always been a drawer, and both hand and digital, and I try to really elevate that in my time as head of architecture there. The other thing I tried to do was to really promote the school through publications. I did about 10 or 12 different publications in the 5 years that I was there, promoting various symposia and exhibitions, doing program booklets, these little booklets on my shelf right here are all from Minnesota. That was, kind of promoting the school and shouting from the rooftops what a great school it was a big part of my passion being had there. And I tried to do that as much as I possibly could.
Yeah. It seems like EDI issues have always been, it seems like they've been a priority for you. And it seemed like that school at Minnesota was pretty diverse. And that seemed like a priority that you pushed as well or worked for.
Yeah. I mean, I attribute my passion for equity and diversity to Renee Chang, who was my predecessor at at Minnesota. From day one, even when I was doing things like I was an assistant professor in 2004, pulling our lecture series together, or when I was coordinating a studio and organizing a juried review. From day one, Renee would always remind me to bring in women to the jury, to bring in women to the lecture series, to bring in diverse voices. And, that reminder, which was always present in my conversations with Renee, has always stuck with me. And Renee's just been a national leader. Her voice has been so important in the architecture discipline in terms of equity and diversity. And she's done so many things. The list is, almost too long to even mention. She wrote the AIA standards around equity and diversity, but one of the things that she did, just as I was becoming head of the school, is she worked with the AIA Minnesota to do a year-long workshop for leaders in the community around equity and diversity. And I participated in that workshop, and that's a thing. That was back in like 2015, 2016, something like that. That was the thing that really blew my mind open around the issue, the importance of equity and diversity in architecture, and in the problem, the huge, enormous problems with the status quo of the way things are. And ever since that year-long course, I've devoured readings and workshops and other courses, other trainings, and try to be a champion to the best of my ability for bringing diverse voices into the discipline of architecture, whether that's the students we bring into the school, or the faculty who we hire to teach in the school, or the communities that we work with in the school, or the communities that architects work with in the profession. There's so much work that needs to be done. I hired, when I was head of the School of Architecture at Minnesota, I hired Jennifer Newsom, who actually is on our lecture series. Yeah. Also, she's coming in a couple of weeks. She's just an amazing architect and academic. She's now teaching at Cornell University. And when she did her job talk, she started out with a number. She just said a number at the beginning of her talk. And I think it was in the 200s. It was like 273 or something like that. And we were all like, she just let it sink in for a minute. And she was like, I'm the 273rd Black woman to be licensed as an architect in this country. And I mean, when you hear these numbers, you realize the problem that we're facing. And I think she was only like the third or fourth woman, in Minnesota to be licensed as an architect or something like that. And I think we only have, one or two African American women
Yeah.
in Colorado who've been licensed. So those kinds of disparities, when compared to the population of the state, really bring into focus the enormity of the mountain we have to climb and the progress that we still have to make. And so, I've been working on this issue and asking this question for over 5 years. I probably was later to the game than I should have been, but I try to ask it at every turn, and it led me. It's one of the reasons I came to the school. This school, actually, Minnesota is not a very diverse school. Minnesota is a pretty homogeneous school. It has some diversity, and it's growing more diverse every year, but it's a pretty white school, and we have gender diversity. We had gender diversity there, but most architecture schools do now. Most architecture schools are around 50% women and 50% men. But one of the reasons I came here was because of the incredible the incredible diversity of the undergraduate program here. I mean, and even since I first came here, we've grown in our diversity in the undergraduate program. We're now, I think, at 60% minoritized students in our undergraduate program, which is just an incredible number for a big state school like this. That was one of the reasons that was one of the things that really attracted me to this school, is that there's an opportunity here to really make a difference and to really change the conversation that we're having in the architecture profession.
What do you think the difference is there? Like Minneapolis, Twin Cities is has some diversity to it, right? I would think it's pretty similar to Denver, but what's the thing that makes that difference here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple different things. One is that CU Denver has a different attitude towards transfer students than Minnesota did. Minnesota's, and the other thing you have to keep in mind is Minnesota is more like Boulder. Minnesota is the big central institution of the university system, just like Boulder is. And CU Denver is one of the three other campuses that are satellite campuses. They don't call us a satellite campus, but
if we're not a satellite, we're a small planet or something.
Campus. Yeah. And so we have a really I think open. Well, so first of all, we're a largely commuter oriented school. We're also a very transfer friendly school. And so students can go to community college for a year or 2 years and then transfer into our program. And that opens our program up to students who wouldn't ordinarily get into our school through the traditional pathway. And because we're a commuter school, whereas Minnesota had a commuter dimension to it, but was much more of a residential school, where you lived in dorms and all that stuff. There's just a different feel here that I think opens this school to students who would ordinarily feel marginalized at a university, and so I think those are some of the key differences.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you after 15 years you moved here, changed. Diversity was one reason. What were some of the other reasons for making such a big change?
Yeah, I mean, I also applied to dean positions when I was at Minnesota, and was interviewed for some dean positions. I ultimately felt like I needed to grow a little bit more and kind of cut my leadership teeth a little bit more before going into a dean position. So when I applied here, when I applied at CU Denver, got the position. It was a really amazing day for me. First of all, you asked the question, what's an amazing moment for you? And being offered the position here was a pretty amazing time in my career. I was incredibly honored and flattered to be offered this position. And it's a huge privilege to sit in this role. And one of the reasons I'm so proud of it is because I was competing against a national audience of candidates. When I was appointed head at University of Minnesota, I was appointed internally, but here I was in a national search and competing with people from all over the world for this position. And so that was for me, I think a big accomplishment for me in my career to interview against some really formidable candidates for a position like this. And once I got the position, and I was offered a few other positions as well, several things were really exciting about this role. One is the diversity of the students. Two is the faculty who are here. I researched the faculty and learned more about the faculty, and I think the faculty here are really an amazing group of people. I was attracted to the design build program that's here. I think it's one of the things that people know about this program from outside. They know that this is one of the top design build programs in the country. I would put us in as one of the top probably 5 design build programs in the country, and that was really exciting for me. And it when I came here, when I was looking at the school, I felt like that would have an impact on the school's attitude towards materiality and making and that kind of thing, which is something that drives my own research. So that resonated with me, the diversity, and then the kind of the making culture that's here, and the faculty who are here, and then Nan Allen, the dean of the school, was incredibly exciting, and is really an amazing person to lead our college, and she was so exciting to talk to, and offered me so many resources, and so many also a lot of independence. She said from the beginning, this is the architecture department is I treat it as you all do what you want to do with the architecture department, and that kind of giving us that kind of independence was really exciting to me. I didn't really have that in Minnesota, so that, and then the last thing was the ability to start my own lab. That was incredibly exciting for me. The promise of my own space and research assistants and equipment and a budget for the lab and things like that was an incredible opportunity for me. And we've been working in the lab for the whole time I've been here now for going on 3 years, and we're really starting to pick up momentum and do some exciting things. And I would have never had that opportunity had I stayed at Minnesota. So it was something that I could leverage coming here, and it's been really, really invaluable to me.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that chair search, and I remember your lecture, the entitled "Boring." It's always stuck in my mind of thinking about this idea of boring in different ways, of boring into different things, and was very excited that you were the one chosen, and so you come here, and we've kind of hit your academic part. But let's get back to the sort of the human part of that practice of your partnership with Blair, And what
Yeah.
especially interests me now, having a firm remotely with a partner in a different place, of always wondering how
Okay.
how
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
work that way, and how you guys have kept this sort of parallel research and firm and projects going, and what's the sort of lineage of that, and some of the projects that stick out there. Let's see if I could slam any more questions
Yeah.
into that one question, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love talking about that. And I mean, first of all, I just love Blair. I mean, he's like my best friend, one of my best friends. I'd say, next to my brother, he's my best friend. And he's just an amazing person. And, another great memory from my past is the day I met Blair and the day we started working together. We just clicked instantly, and he's one of the funniest people I know, and he just keeps me laughing all the time. He loves to draw caricatures of me. So if you ever want to see me really embarrassed, you can ask Blair for his catalog of caricatures that he's drawn of me.
Is that one of the ones on your website, your profile picture on the website? Yeah. I saw that today. That's fun.
Yeah. But some of them are way less flattering than that one. So Blair and I think Blair and I subsist through our love of explicitly non-architectural things. We always have felt like a bit of like we've had a bit of imposter syndrome in the architecture field. We've always, we like a lot of things that architects don't typically like. Like, we're big sports fans. We love to talk college. We love to talk college football. We can talk college football.
I didn't know that about you. Yeah, we need to talk more college football. Yeah.
Yeah. My Bearcats are
they're doing pretty well.
This year.
Yeah, it's a good year.
Yeah. So we I have a funny story about the Bearcats. When I went to school at Cincinnati, the Bearcats were so bad. They were horrible. And Nippert Stadium is one of the great stadiums in all of college football because it's right in the middle of campus, which not very many are. And they were so bad that I remember they would give tickets away to the students, and I would go to Nippert Stadium for a quiet place to study during football games.
That's funny.
There'd be nobody there, and you could just kind of
bring your models there, make some models, and that's funny.
Not the case anymore. They're pretty amazing. But yeah, so Blair and I have this love of these things, these like little Japanese kid robot dunnies. We have a love of video games and all kinds of stuff that I think we can relate to one another and we find funny, and we know that in a gathering of architects it would just fall flat. So I think he and I have always resonated that way. Like, we don't necessarily drink the Kool-Aid of architecture, and I think it's actually served us really well. We trust each other to the ends of the earth and back. And so when one of us is busy, the other one can drive a project. When the other one's busy, the other person can drive a project. And we know that we can trust what each other is doing. But we love to work together. We love to spend time together. And, to this day, I spend hours a week on the phone or on Zoom with Blair every week, either in his meetings. So he has a lab up at UBC called HouMinn Lab. And that's part of the reason why we named our lab LoDo Lab. This kind of HouMinn LoDo has a nice kind
that
of
worked out
resonance.
Well.
Yeah. And so I meet once a week in his lab in LoDo, and he meets once a week with my crew here in LoDo Lab. And so we're constantly working on things together. He's got projects that he's primarily driving there, and I've got projects I'm primarily driving here, but it's all under the umbrella of HouMinn Practice. So yeah, and I think we've always at heart had an interest in the periphery of architecture, and that's another reason we've both resonated. He can draw like nobody I know. I mean, his drawing abilities are second to none. It's amazing. He's got his start in medical illustration. That's what he originally went to school for, and so his like interest in illustration and in drawing is really valuable. And then we both have this interest in, I think, much more kind of object scale, human scale interventions. Most of our work tends to be things that we can make and produce, at the scale of an object or at the scale of a person. So I don't know, there's all these like kind of weird things that aligned where we met, and we knew it was a kind of a perfect match from the beginning.
And, you mentioned that you've sort of been always haunted by your thesis and how that manifests itself in your work.
Yeah.
What's the project with HouMinn that best sort of captures or gets closest to that thesis of?
Yeah. I think the project that is maybe closest to the thesis,
or just the spirit of the thesis, maybe, not necessarily that, but
yeah. Well, both in terms of what we were doing, what I was doing with the thesis, and in terms of the spirit of the thesis. The project that is probably the closest is a project that we did maybe 7 years ago called Verivac Wall. It was a project that we ended up winning an Architect Magazine R&D award for. And it was a project where we used plastic. So my thesis was all about plastic, and the Verivac wall is a plastic wall. I actually have samples of it. I know this isn't a video podcast, but
we can put it up. Yeah,
in my office that I could show you. Yeah, but it was a wall that was a redesign of the front lobby space of the architecture school at University of Minnesota. We were having our 100th anniversary, or our 100th anniversary of being a school of architecture when I was there. And Renee Cheng was the head of the school at the time. And so she asked me to kind of reskin the lobby, because we were going to be having like thousands of alums into the school to celebrate the 100th anniversary. And so we did this wall, this Verivac wall, that was an acoustic intervention. The space was real bouncy acoustically. It was kind of echoey. And so we designed this plastic wall that was informed not by how we wanted the wall to look, but how we wanted the space to sound. So the wall was kind of parametrically driven by a study of sound waves and how we wanted the space to sound. And so it's a modular wall system made out of these thermoformed plastic panels, and they're made in a really unconventional way. So typically when you thermoform plastic, you make a mold. So you usually make a mold out of like aluminum or wood, and you mill it, and then you suck you heat up plastic, you pull it down over the mold, you suck the air out, and it makes a perfect carbon copy of the mold. And then you can make like thousands of that same shape. What you can't do in traditional thermoforming is you can't make variations, because those molds are really expensive. So as soon as you make a variation on the mold, you've just doubled the cost of whatever you're doing. And if you make another variation, now you've tripled the cost. So what we did is we came up with a variable vacuum forming system, which allowed you to get variations in shape out of the same mold. So essentially what we did is we had like a frame with cables stretched across it, and the cables were adjusted on a per panel basis in terms of their location across that frame. And then we would heat up plastic, and instead of vacuum forming the plastic, we heated up the plastic and then slumped it down inside the frame, and the plastic would ooze between the cables. And so the closer the cables were together, the smaller of a little bump or pimple you would get. The further apart the cables were, you'd get a big droop. And then what we did is we took each panel and we ran it through a hot wire cutter. And so wherever the bubbles were real high, they would get schneided off and form a hole. And wherever they were lower, they would not hit the hot wire cutter, and they would maintain their kind of bubble shape. So what we did, if you zoom back out, what we did is we created a grasshopper script that said where we wanted the wall to be acoustically absorptive, we would want the plastic to get cut off, and then we would backfill it with acoustically absorptive industrial felt. Where we wanted the wall to be more bouncy, we would let the plastic droop less, and it would be a bouncy wall. So there became a direct corollary between the relationship of the spacing of the wires and the direct bounciness or absorption of the wall. So there's this like set of kind of parametric relationships that says we want the wall to sound a particular way and perform a particular way, and so its shape is driven by that. And what I really love about the project is that there's this incredible unpredictability to it. Like, we could never really predict exactly the shape of that slumping plastic because it would change every day depending on the humidity in the air temperature. If we left the plastic heated up for 1 second longer or 1 second shorter, it would slump differently. And so there was this beautiful kind of unpredictability to the final project that I talked about earlier, where our hand was not part of the our hand definitely was involved in the formation of the final project, but it wasn't solely responsible for the formation of the final project. What the material was just as actively a contributor to the final project as we were as the designers. So I think it's most closely related to my thesis, and it also most fervently drove work that we did subsequent to it.
Yeah. For you, is that under the umbrella of sort of this idea of hyper natural, like with your book? Is that or is that a different sort of string and concept?
Yeah, that's kind of a different thing. I mean, hypernatural, well, no, it's related. It's related for sure. I mean, hypernatural was really driven by, so I wrote that book with my colleague, Blaine Brownell, who served as the head of the program after I left. He's a good friend of mine. He actually went to Rice with me, and then he came up to Minnesota, and we taught together at Minnesota for a while. He's now the head of the program, the chair of the program at UNC Charlotte. He just started there last year. Excuse me. And so hypernatural really was initially driven. When I was in Minnesota, I was asked to teach a class on biomimicry. And I didn't know anything about biomimicry. I really maybe had a mild interest in it, but I didn't really know much about it. I was still an assistant professor. And so Renee thought it could be maybe a driver for my research. And so I actually had the opportunity to meet Janine Benyus and her partner, Dana Baumeister. Janine wrote the book Biomimicry. She coined the term, and she started the Biomimicry Guild, and is an amazing person. And so I wrote the syllabus for biomimicry in collaboration with her, which was a huge privilege and honor to work with her. And so I started to get this interest in biomimicry in its original term, and started teaching studios and seminars. And so I probably taught 10 or 12 studios and seminars on this topic of biomimicry while I was at Minnesota. Blaine came, and Blaine had been writing these books called Transmaterial, which many architects have on their bookshelves. Transmaterial is a pretty famous book. And he asked me, because of his interest in material, if we wanted to co-write a book together on the intersection work that happens at the intersection of biology and architecture. And so that was the kind of driver behind writing that book. That book totally changed my view on the relationship between biology and architecture. It made me really skeptical of the term biomimicry. And it's not a term I really use anymore. And it also opened my eyes to thinking in different ways about the relationship between biology and architecture. I got way more interested in materials that are grown and evolved from biological materials and through a partnership with biology than I did in mimicking biology. And that's kind of where my work is now. But the relationship between Vervac wall and hypernatural is that in both cases, the people who are interested in working with biology have to relinquish control. They have to let go of control. And this idea that good design can actually paradoxically come from relinquishing control as opposed to exerting more control is something I'm really interested in, and something that became a central theme in the book Hypernatural.
Yeah, that seems powerful.
Yeah.
I liked what you said earlier about wanting to move towards things that scare you or that bring you fear or that challenge you. So what is that thing right now? What's the next thing that you're working towards that is a little scary or hard?
Yeah. I think it's taking my lab and the research in the lab to the next level, like really getting that work out there and truly collaborating with experts who don't think like I do. We're collaborating with a forestry biologist. His name is Brian Buma. He's a forestry biologist at CU Denver. And the project that we're doing, which is called Nursepod, is like a little biodegradable seed that you would put out in an area that had been burned down from forest fires that would nurse sapling trees to life and help them to grow. One of the problems with replanting after a forest fire is that a lot of the sapling trees just die because they don't get enough water and they don't have the right conditions. So we've designed this little Nursepod, which is 3D printed out of biodegradable material that will nurse a sapling tree back to life and allow it to mature and grow into a full tree. And that project, because of climate change and because of forest fires that we're facing and all of the natural kind of phenomenon that are turned on their head right now, has the potential to be incredibly relevant. This idea of going after a really, really big pot of money and then using that money wisely and smartly and facilitating it and allowing the lab to grow because of it is kind of scary. It's something that faculty in the sciences do all the time and they're comfortable with, but in my own research, I've always worked on a shoestring budget, and I've always worked with, dribs and drabs of, a few $1,000 here or there. I've never, stared down the barrel of a huge, let's say NSF grant or something like that. And I'm not saying we're going to get one. We may never get one, but I feel like the work is poised and positioned better than it ever has been to really garner some interest and some big funding. And if we were to land something like that, it would be exciting, but also really, really scary.
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, I just really appreciate you as a leader, I think, especially like within the school. And I was excited to have you at the school, and I grabbed you on your very first day in Denver and got you to do a graphics review. And
Yeah, you were the first review that I did when I started as chair of the
I feel like you used to have like your bags with you or something.
I was thinking it was like on the first day.
Yeah, hadn't moved in yet, but I it's just you don't disappoint, and it just continue to kind of raise the school and be a strong leader who also listens well, and pushing for more equity and inclusion, and then also within the city with AIA and everything else. I appreciate you, and thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, I'm honored to be here, Adam, and thanks for the kind words. It's really, really fun to finally be able to connect with you on your podcast, and I'm super happy to have you as part of our academic community. It's been great getting to know you. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, cool. See ya.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.